So today I'm going to be talking to you about piston accelerated weapons, what they are, and how to build them. Our first example is an accelerated tank cannon, and as you can see it fires much farther than they normally would. It goes so far we can barely hear it, and if I keep it extended it'll fire without the accelerator, and you can see it's a much shorter range. So basically what the piston accelerators do is they make it so that the projectile goes much farther and faster than it normally would. And that's useful for a lot of things. It also makes it more accurate because there's less drop in the projectile as it travels because it's moving faster. See, in fact, it's got so little drop I shot over it the first time. It also makes it a lot harder to dodge the shots. Next up is the box cannon, which fires metal crates very far and fast. Now this weapon's not as powerful as it used to be because it got kind of nerfed in the most recent damage update. But it's still a pretty fun weapon to use because, well, it just kind of bonks the snot out of your enemies. It doesn't do a whole lot of damage, but it throws them around really well, even if they're quite heavy. It can also be used to knock rockets out of the air, and a couple other utility things, so it's still a useful device here in Trailmakers. Next up are Spearguns, which can also be used to throw dynamite, rockets, and a bunch of other things. But basically it just uses the detachable block, and then whatever you want to throw, instead of using a cannon or a gun or something like that. And similar to the box cannon, it doesn't really do a whole lot of damage, but when it does, it can be quite comical, because these things can stick into targets or do impact damage like that. And that's a lot of force coming from just a single little pipe piece in a cone. Don't mind that. But yeah, you can see it stuck right in. And last but certainly not least are Bombay artilleries, which take the Bombay block that normally just drops the bombs and uses them like a projectile. And as you can see, when you make a bigger version, they can be quite devastating. They also have very long range. Give it a second. Way off in distance. And that's barely angling the arms upwards. Will they come down before I change the clip? Will it take too long? Anyways, and at the end I'll also cover hybrid systems like this that have both a box cannon and a Bombay artillery running off the same accelerator. That way you can save complexity in your builds if you want to have more than one weapon type in the same thing. Oops. My safety system let me down there a little bit, but we're okay. Anyways, let's get on to the tutorial. So the first thing I'll be showing for the acceleration is a tank cannon, but before we accelerate it, it's worth showing it in its natural form. So here we are lined up about on the edge, and our shot travels about 4 blocks on the grid on the floor, and it has enough recoil to knock us over, but that's not a good enough range. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a single layer of pistons, and start making this round go a lot farther and faster and making it more useful overall. After all, if you can fire farther than your enemies can, you can stay safe and finish them off without worrying. So, I almost went into the configuration out of habit without talking about it, but what we're going to do is we're going to clear the green input, and we're going to use the red input for our firing button on our pistons. We're going to set the speed to -100, the start position of 0, and the auto reset on. And now what this negative speed trick does is it makes it go a lot faster than it does in the positive direction because of the way the pistons work. They're set up so that they normally withdraw faster than they extend, but if you reverse the speed, then you can make them extend much faster. We also, in order to make our accelerator work, have to add a delay of 0.02 to our firing piece, and that's very important because it'll blow yourself up otherwise. Now, our shot goes much farther, although you can see we have a lot more recoil. So what we have to do is add what I call a recoil absorber. And for this setup, it's just going to be another row of pistons in the back, and an equal amount of weight to the tank cannon, which is 4.9 kilograms. A rotating servo is 5, which is close enough. And now, we don't even tip over at all. It balances out the recoil of both the accelerator and the tank cannon itself. And our shot still goes at least twice the distance of the unaccelerated cannon. But I typically make these a little bit bigger. My preferred accelerator has 3 layers of pistons in the front and 1 layer of pistons in the back. And if you do this with with an unequal number of pistons on the one side from the other, you have to have a much heavier counterweight to compensate for it. So we're going to need 80 kilograms on the back, a 50 and a 30. And now, we can't even hear the explosion because it's so far off in the distance. And still, no recoil, no getting tossed about, just a little bit of a judder, and I say as I tip over. But without the recoil absorber, if I take this off, you'll see with great power comes great recoil. Once you start accelerating them, you have to compensate for the thrashing motion. Unless you have a very heavy build, it'll just throw you around worse than you're damaging your target. Next up is the box cannon, which means we take our metal crate dispenser and put it on here. We're using the same accelerator rig as before. With our negative input has X, we cleared our green input, a -100 speed, start position 0, and auto reset on. And then on the metal crate dispenser, instead of a delay of 0.02, it's a duration of 0.02. And that's worth noting in just a moment. I'm just going to change our green input to X and clear our red input, because the green input is our firing button for this, and the red input will just delete the last box that we made. So we don't have to worry about that right now. But before I add this delay in here, let me go over the basics of how this block actually works, because some people might not know. So the way that the metal crate dispenser works is that when you press your firing button, it charges up a box. You can see the little barrel sucks in, and then when you let go of the button, it dispenses the box and throws it a little bit of a ways with a little bit of force. Sometimes it can break blocks, and it can be funny on its own, but not too practical. Also, if you try to rapid fire them, you won't be charging them all the way, and they'll be even more useless. However, we're not going to be charging it up at all, because what putting the duration to 0.02 does is it makes it so that we're basically not charging up the shot at all. It'll just be creating the box without any momentum at all. And if we move that directly on the end of our accelerator, you can see they're going at least twice as far, if not more, than before we had them on the accelerator. And that's what makes it more useful, even now that the recent impact damage update changes. Well, they nerfed it. It used to vaporize anything it touched, more or less, but now it just throws things around, as you saw in the intro. Still, a very fun weapon. Anyways, moving on. Next I'm going to cover detachable blocks and how they can be used with our accelerators. So if we just add a layer of detachable blocks onto here, and switch their green input to our firing button, and add a delay of 0.02, this is like the tank cannon, it's the delay, and most things that you're accelerating, it will be the delay. The only exception that I'll be showing in the video is the box cannons. And now, using this, we can throw whatever we want with a lot of power behind it. So, let's start off with something that everyone's going to want to try right off the bat. Dynamite. I'm going to position them so that they're not attached to each other, so that they should spread out a little bit when they get launched. And I'm going to clear their input just because. Safety first. So now... oh, they didn't detonate. And you can see it throws them well off into the distance. And because this lump of dynamite and detachable blocks weighs more than our tank cannon or dispenser did, we have to adjust our counterweight a little bit to keep ourselves from flipping over. 100 kilograms might be a little much, but we'll see. No, that's slightly better. It's probably somewhere in between those two weights on the back. But we can throw whatever we'd like with this. If we want to have a high impact damage, we might throw a weight block, for example. And that gives a lot of recoil. But getting hit by that would likely break quite a few blocks as well. And last but not least, we're going to do the Bombay Artillery, which involves a little bit of logic, but don't worry, it's not too complicated, it's mostly just timing. So we'll grab our Bombay, and stick it on the front here. Make sure it's attached. And we're going to add a 0.02 delay, and clear the firing input completely. Then go into our pistons, select all of them, and clear their input as well, because our logic is going to be taking care of that now. I'm just going to add a little bit of the panel here. Now we only need 6 logic blocks to make this work. We've got our NOR gate, our accumulator, and 4 OR gates. Now this is our safety mechanism and timing circuit here. And I'm going to go over them one by one along with their settings. So our accumulator is going to be our main firing piece. We are going to put X on the green input, change the minimum to 0, the maximum is 4.4, and a scale of 60. And this is going to run into all 4 of our OR gates, because this is what keeps our timing circuit active while the bombs are being dispensed and keeps it from dropping our bombs on our feet. Because when we start firing, it's going to produce all 4 bombs regardless of whether we keep our finger on the input or not. But if we stop running our accelerator early, then we're going to blow up. Next is the NOR gate, and this is what's resetting our safety mechanism. It's going to have an output of -0.1, and we're attaching that to our accumulator, so that after this fills up, it'll begin draining slowly, and it'll stay active long enough that 95% of the time we won't drop a bomb on our foot, but it resets quick enough so it'll be ready to fire as soon as the bomb bay is recharged the next time around. So our safety mechanism doesn't slow down our rate of fire at all. And next is the timing gates. We're going to select all 4 of the OR gates. We're going to bring their output to -1 and set a duration of 0.1. Then we're going to link them into all our pistons. And the bomb bay itself. And then we go in and time them individually. The first one doesn't need any delay because our 0.02 is already taken care of in the firing piece. The second one has a delay of 0.27. The third one has a delay of 0.51. And the last one has a delay of 0.77. Now these may seem a little arbitrary, but from everyone I've talked to, these are about the only timings that'll work to make sure that your bombs are dispensed properly. Because the bombs aren't created out of the bomb bay in perfect quarter-second intervals, they are askew slightly like that. So if you try to just have the accelerator pulse every quarter second, it'll just blow itself up on the second bomb. But if I get everything correctly, and wait for it to charge up, now we have an accelerated bomb bay thrower. And from end to end, I'll go over the settings one more time before we move on to the advanced stuff. We've got a delay of 0.02 on our firing piece. We use a negative input on our pistons, a speed of -100, a start position of 0, and the auto reset on. Then we have our NOR gate set to -0.1 attached to the accumulator. The accumulator has X on the green input, minimum of 0, maximum of 4.4, scale of 60, and that's attached to all 4 OR gates. The OR gates are all attached to the pistons and the bomb bay. They have a -1 output and a duration of 0.10, and the first one has no delay, the second has a delay of 0.27, the third has a delay of 0.51, and finally a delay of 0.77. Now, moving on to the advanced. Finally, we have a hybrid system that has a box cannon and bomb bay artillery mixed into one, and it's not a single bomb bay artillery, but a quadruple one as well. So it starts in box cannon mode, indicated by the white light on the side, and if you press right on the D-pad, the same firing button will run the bomb bay artillery instead, off the same pistons and everything. And I know this looks like it's a more daunting set of logic, it really isn't. All of this down here is the same timing circuit we just talked about before. Except we have a delay for our second, third, and fourth bomb bay in order to get that rapid fire spray like that, I say. Not firing. So the few things to note here are we can reuse our NOR gate across all 4 of our accumulators. And then we have this one attached to the accumulator instead of running the accumulator directly, where our signal from our switcher will be turning on this accumulator and these 3 OR gates. So if I show that over here, it turns on this, 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 and this. And these just had a timing of 0.06, 0.12, and 0.18. Basically 1/16 of a second approximately, because we're spraying 16 bombs in approximately 1 second. And up here at the top is our switcher, which allows us to run both of them back and forth. We've got an OR gate with our firing button, and that's hooked into these 3 AND gates. We have a NOR gate that's hooked into these 2 below it, and we have an OR gate on toggle with our switching button, and that's hooked into both the NOR gate and our 3rd AND gate. And I know this is a lot of ORs and ANDs to be throwing around, but I hope it's easy enough to follow visually. And basically what this does is when you spawn in, the NOR gate is active, and it's giving 1/2 of the signals that we need to turn on our AND gates here. One AND gate has a positive output, the other AND gate has a negative output, and that's to run our box cannon, because a box cannon needs the pistons to have a negative input. Again, we would normally have our firing button directly on the red input, but it needs a positive input on the green, or on the firing piece. It needs the green input to create the box, because if we were to give it a negative signal as well, it would just delete the box. The bomb bays don't care about the negative signal, because they only have one input, the green input, and that, along with all the other weapons like tank cannons and tiny cannons and such, means that any input they receive will make them fire, positive or negative. Here's 2 of that same weapon installed on one of my favorite gunship chassis. And now that we're a little bit higher in the air, you can see that the bombs are landing at 2 different distances, which wasn't intentional with this design, but I consider it a happy accident because more spread out bombs means more chance of hitting your target. And so with the knowledge of this tutorial, you should be able to build all the piston accelerator weapons you'd like. From sniper cannons, to box cannons, to things like this. That just stab a giant arrow through the target with extreme power. Anyways, thanks for watching. Like and subscribe, comment if you have any questions. Bye-bye now.
PlayStation